Hi class, so this is the first video that you're going to be having a look at about the Gallipoli campaign, and in this short clip I'm going to be talking about the origins of the campaign. So once the war was not over within 4 months by Christmas of 1914 as predicted, the leaders of the major powers were worried that the war could go on for a very long time. The fighting in Europe had quickly stalled, with both the Western and the Eastern fronts not providing any decisive wins. The British government in particular was looking for ways of overcoming the stalemate on the Western front, and they thought that one option was to use the increased numbers of their new volunteer army to try and force a victory. And we have Winston Churchill, the First Lord of the Admiralty, who was basically in charge of the Navy, developing an idea that they should open up a new theatre of war or area of fighting. And he eventually decided on a plan, which was supported by the British War Cabinet, to send a naval force to enter the Dardanelles and sail through to Constantinople, which is down here. The hope was that this would cause Turkey to surrender, as well as providing access for the Russians with a supply route through to the Mediterranean Sea. And they predicted that the Germans would send soldiers away from the Western Front to this new area of fighting to deal with this new threat. So where is this new area? So Turkey was a potentially valuable location for the Allies to control. This is because the Ottoman Empire had previously controlled a really large area of land. It was actually the remnants of the ancient Roman Empire of the East, but it had been falling apart throughout the 19th century. And part of this breakup is what we've already touched on when we looked at why there was so much unrest in the Balkans, which led up to Gavrilo Princip's infamous shooting of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie. So on this map here, you can see Russia up here, and Russia, being one of the largest countries in the world, extends way up over here, all the way off the map, but there's a little edge of it there. This is Turkey, and you can see over here Greece, and of course off the map on this side will be Germany and France, and then Britain further over. So Russia wanted to be able to sail ships through to wherever they wanted to go all year round, but this was only possible if she could sail from the Black Sea through here, through the Bosphorus, which is a really narrow strait here, into the Sea of Marmara, through the Dardanelles, into the Aegean, and then down into the Mediterranean. And the reason why this was the only way that Russia could sail out through to Europe was that for much of the year, Russia's other ports were frozen over, with the country being predominantly either in the Arctic Circle or close to it. Obviously, weather becomes a big issue for them. And in an age when ships were the fastest mode of transport, this was vital to the war effort, and you could probably argue post-war trade, trying to take control of these areas. The Ottomans had wanted to remain neutral in the lead up to World War I, but they had problems controlling their subject countries, and they needed an ally they hoped to that would help them stop their empire from falling apart. The Ottomans were quite afraid that the Allies, Britain and France, would want to take control of their empire for themselves, after the war. And so they tried to make an alliance with them as a way of preventing it, kind of keeping your enemies close. But the Allies rejected them. And this essentially sort of forces the Ottomans to ally with Germany. The alliance therefore threatened Russia's ability to sail freely into Europe through the really narrow strait of the Bosphorus. And today, it's through here. Istanbul is what we call it, although it was called Constantinople in the time of the First World War. So if we have a look at the close-up here, this is Gallipoli, and this section here is the Dardanelles Strait, and it was that strait that the Gallipoli campaign was looking to take control of. If you have a look at this image here, you can see just how narrow it is. So this is the Bosphorus, and the modern day city of Istanbul is actually located on either side. And when you look at this photo here, you can see just how close it is, that it's just quite a short bridge across it, and you can clearly see from one side to the other. But interestingly, it's the dividing line between Europe and Asia. And it is the narrowest strait in the world. So obviously Russia trying to sail ships through this section here, as German allies, Turkey could very easily have destroyed the Russians' ships. So this is something that they didn't want to happen, obviously. So the British plan, come up with by Churchill, was for the British fleet to bombard the Turkish forts, which were on either side of the Dardanelles, and therefore knock out the powerful guns that protected the Dardanelles and protected the entry into the Sea of Marmara and onto Constantinople. We've got here a picture of a fort, which became a major objective later on once the Allied soldiers were set to land. The British expanded their plan to include an invasion by Allied ground troops of the Gallipoli Peninsula, and that's this narrow finger of land. You can see from this picture just how mountainous it is and rugged it is. And they decided that they would have troops on hand just in case the fleet was unsuccessful in destroying the Turkish forts. And eventually this is exactly what happened. So these forts down here, and as they're all the way along up towards Constantinople, you can see these marks here showing where the forts are, were not destroyed by the Allies. And the reason why is because the Navy was wanting to sail up out of the Aegean Sea from Greece and up through this narrow strait here. But the Turkish forces knew that the Allies were coming, and so they had decided to lay underwater mines. And as the Allies are moving in to this narrow strait, some of those ships touched the mines and therefore sunk. The boats that were sent into the strait to remove the mines were manned by non-military personnel, and that meant that they couldn't be ordered into a life-threatening situation. And they actually refused to go into the strait because the gunners from the forts could kill them quite easily. And so what this means is that the Navy has to withdraw, and instead they decide on using troops. And these troops are going to be landed all the way along at different points, different beaches, all the way along here to take control of the peninsula, with the plan that they would then continue on and take control of Istanbul, which is sort of off the picture, up the corner here. So now you're going to go on to having a look at the Australians being trained in Cairo in the next video.